We now move on to the next concept in photography, which is the depth of field. This perhaps is one of the most important concepts and maybe one of the most creative tools also which you have in your hand. Now, what is this depth of field? Depth of field is a range of sharpness in a photograph in front of and behind the subject. It is a range of sharpness in front of and behind the subject. It can be controlled. There are three controls in it. We will deal with one after another. It can be controlled to a large extent, but it cannot be controlled totally. The first one is the aperture. Smaller the aperture opening, greater will be the depth of field. In a camera lens having from 1.4 to 22, 1.4 you will have the least depth of field and 22 you will have the maximum depth of field. Between 8 and 5.6, 8 will give you a better depth of field than 5.6. Now, let us look at a few examples. This is a range of 3 toy elephants where I have focused on the first elephant and shot it at 1.4, which is a fully open aperture. So, I get a very shallow depth of field. Only the point of focus, which is the first elephant, is sharp. Even the second elephant and the third are completely out of focus. You can just, the second one you can probably see the shape of an elephant, and third you can't even see that. The first one is absolutely sharp because I focus my lens on the first elephant, and since my aperture is fully open, it is 1.4, the rest of the things have gone completely out of focus. I get a very shallow depth of field at a fully open aperture. I do not change anything, I do not change my camera settings, I do not change anything else, I do not change my focus, I move on to f4. So, from 1.4 to f4 I am cutting down 2 stops. Now, if you see the second elephant, the design on the second elephant, you can see it slightly, but not absolutely sharp, but much better than 1.4. I will go back and show you the 1.4 so that you will have the comparison. This was shot at 1.4 and there you see the second elephant also getting some amount of clarity. Right. Now, the same thing, I do not adjust anything else. I move on to f8. Now, the second elephant is much sharper than the previous photograph, and to a certain extent the design or pattern on the third elephant is also visible. So, my depth of field keeps increasing from 1.4 down to f8 at various stages. You would see the increase in my range of focus or range of sharpness in my photograph from the nearest to the furthest. Again, I move on to f16. The second elephant is very sharp. Yes, the first is of course sharp in every picture because my focus was there. The second elephant has also come in sharp, and the third elephant, yes, you can call it sharp. Yes, you can, to a large degree you can call it sharp, and you can also see some objects in the background getting some detail. At f16, all the 3 elephants are acceptably sharp. I would not say absolutely sharp, but acceptably sharp. Now, I move on to f22. This is the sharpest I can get. That is why I said to a large extent it can be controlled. Of course, even now here the third elephant is not as sharp as the first elephant, but this is the maximum sharpness, a range of sharpness, a range of clarity I can get even at f22. So, I will go back again, just remember these slides. I move on, I move one step backward, I move to f16 where I lose some detail in the third elephant, then I move back to f8. You see my range of sharpness getting lower and lower, then I move back to f4. You can see it getting shallower, my depth of field is getting shallow, and then I move on to f1.4 where only the first elephant is sharp. I move forward again, here it is f4, f8, f16 and f22. Right. Now, the comparison between three different apertures f4, f8 and f22, you see the difference over here. All three of them, all three apertures are there on the screen. You see the difference in the depth of field or range of sharpness. I will leave that for some time for you to observe. The second factor affecting depth of field is the focal length of the lens. As focal length increases, depth of field will decrease. When you shoot something with a 50 mm lens and the same thing when you shoot with a 100 mm lens, a 50 mm lens would give you a better range of focus, a better depth of field than a 100 mm lens. But here remember, in all two conditions, whenever I say a 50 mm lens would give you a better depth of field, my f should not change and my camera to subject also should not change. Other two factors remaining the same, you will find the changes or differences in depth of field. So, let us have a look at a few pictures. This is a picture of a few lenses lined one behind the other. I used a 50 mm lens and shot it with an aperture of f8. Now, I have fairly good depth of field. I can see all the three lenses. I can see the elephants also in this thing, and there are some photographs in the background which are also visible, which are, I would not say absolutely sharp, but to a certain extent you can make out what it is. There is a doll there, there are so many other things over there. Now, I am going to shoot the same thing using a 85 mm lens. Yes, the subjects have been enlarged, they have come closer because of the telephoto lens, but if you carefully look at depth of field, it is only the first and the second lenses which are sharp. The third lens is also gone out of focus. The elephants have also gone out of focus, whereas I will go back to the previous one. The elephants were sharp and also the things in the background, the photographs in the background were also sharp, but when I move on from a 50 mm lens to a 85 mm lens, the third lens has also gone out of focus and the elephants have also gone completely out of focus. So, I move on to 120 mm where you can see very clearly that only the first lens is sharp, the rest of the things are all gone completely out of focus. So, from this it is clear that as focal length increases, depth of field will decrease. Here are the three pictures shot at 50 mm, 85 mm and 120 mm, where you can clearly see the changes in depth of field. Now, we go to the third factor in depth of field that affects depth of field. It is the camera to subject distance. Now, as the camera to subject distance increases, depth of field will also increase. For example, you are shooting something from 10 feet and you are shooting the same thing from let us say 20 feet. What you shoot at 20 feet will have a better depth of field than what you shot at 10 feet. Now, remember this point over here. All the three factors, that is the focal length, the aperture and the camera to subject distance, are all interdependent. The other two factors should remain the same. If you change one of them, again the depth of field will change. For example, now let us talk about aperture and focal length. You are shooting something at let us say f8 with a 50 mm lens. You are shooting the same thing with a 100 mm lens. Now, if you change the aperture to f11, again the policy will not hold good. You will find changes. The other two factors should remain the same for you to see the differences in the depth of field. Now, here is the illustration to show you that changes in camera to subject distance will also result in a change in depth of field. So, these are the three factors which you should bear in mind whenever you want to have control over this depth of field.
On your screen is a good illustration of the three parameters that affect or control depth of field. The first is the aperture. A smaller aperture opening gives you better or good depth of field. The second that we see is the focal length. As the focal length increases, the depth of field would decrease. And the third that we see is the camera to subject distance. As the distance increases, the depth of field would increase. To better our understanding of depth of field, we will see some examples of shallow depth of field and good depth of field in the next video.